Some of these movies flopped so hard, their studios pretended they never existed. This one should have been a win. Sing Sing had the reviews, the festival hype, the awards buzz. A feel-good prison drama on a $2 million budget should have been an easy hit. But A24 completely fumbled the release. They dumped it in a tiny handful of theaters, barely gave it any marketing, and locked out a huge chunk of the audience that would have actually gone to see it. Even die-hard cinephiles couldn't find a screening. Online theories say the studio spread themselves too thin, focused everything on the brutalist, and left Sing Sing in the dust. Whether that's true or not, $3.5 million worldwide for a movie this strong is ridiculous. And then, to make it worse, they sat on the streaming release for 6 months. The movie never had a shot. The studio did nothing for it. They basically buried it. Luca Guadagnino's movies never really rake in cash at the box office, but Queer tanked harder than anything he's ever made. Easily his biggest flop. A Daniel Craig-led adaptation of William Burroughs' 1985 novel, Queer had a massive $50 million budget, almost as much as Challengers, a movie that actually had mainstream appeal. But even with all the buzz around Craig's awards season push, this thing sank. $4 million worldwide. That's it. Nobody expected it to be a blockbuster, but that number is brutal. The budget didn't do it any favors. Where that $50 million even went is anyone's guess. But the bigger problem is that nobody actually showed up. Almost no one bought tickets. No one watched it. And the worst part, it's one of the boldest movies of the year. Craig gives what might be his best performance ever. Some people were sure he was getting an Oscar nomination. Didn't happen. Queer got completely shut out, one of 2025's biggest Oscar snubs. All year, people were talking about Nightbitch like it was Amy Adams' ticket to Oscar night. But by the time it actually came out, it barely made a ripple. This one had everything going for it. Black comedy horror, edgy concept, Adams plays a stay-at-home mom who starts thinking she's turning into a dog at night, big buzz from the Rachel Yoder novel, and a solid director in Marielle Heller. But then Disney barely even gave it a theatrical run, just a quick awards qualifying release. And even with that, just $170,000. Worldwide. That's not a flop. That's a ghost town. Mixed reviews didn't help, and when it finally hit Hulu, it disappeared from streaming charts almost immediately. Adams still got some attention, Golden Globe, Independent Spirit nods, but the movie itself is too divisive, too weird for most people. What was supposed to be a major Oscar contender ended up as just another forgotten release. Horror movies make money. That's just how it works. So when Azrael, a Samara Weaving-led horror flick with a solid hook, completely tanked at the box office, that was unexpected. It's an action horror movie with Weaving going up against a violent cult in a world where nobody speaks. Barely any dialogue, all tension. Between her Scream Queen status and the whole dialogue-free setup, this should have had at least a modest shot at success. But no. IFC Films only put it in 762 theaters in North America. Barely any global release. And in the end, it pulled in just $617,000 worldwide. A brutal number, especially for horror, where even the bad ones usually scrape together a few million. Then it got dropped onto Shudder. Barely any promo, and that was that. No real buzz, no big reaction, nothing. Not a perfect movie by any stretch, but definitely didn't deserve to be tossed aside like that. Unlike Azrael, nobody expected Sasquatch Sunset to light up the box office. Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough playing Sasquatches in a slow-burn art house drama. Yeah, that's a niche audience. It premiered at Sundance to strong reviews and actually got a surprisingly wide release. 856 theaters in the US, more than Azrael somehow. But still, just $1 million total. Not shocking considering most people probably took one look at it and assumed it was a comedy. Low budget, well acted, and clearly made with a lot of craft, but outside of hardcore film circles, nobody really showed up for it. Not surprising, but still kind of a shame. If anything, this feels like one of those movies that'll get a second life as a cult favorite down the line. Some people definitely saw The War of the Rohirrim, The box office says $20 million worldwide. But for a Lord of the Rings movie, that's a disaster. Across 6 Peter Jackson-directed films, this franchise has averaged almost $1 billion per movie. So Warner Brothers dropping an animated Lord of the Rings film and barely scraping $20.5 million is beyond embarrassing. This thing should have been an easy win. $30 million budget, built-in fan base, global brand recognition. No way it should have flopped. Except this wasn't made because anyone actually cared about it. Warner Brothers greenlit The War of the Rohirrim just to keep the rights to Tolkien's work. They didn't care about making something great, and they definitely didn't care about promoting it properly. Marketing was bare minimum. Reviews were mixed. The box office crashed. It didn't even make back its budget in theaters. But for Warner Brothers, that loss means nothing. Sony really overestimated how much people cared about the origins of Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night had one of the most stacked ensemble casts of the year, but that didn't matter. This thing flopped fast. Critics at Toronto Film Festival went nuts for it, some even calling it a major Oscar contender. But the second it hit theaters, it went nowhere. Sony rolled it out wide in North America like they had a hit on their hands, and it made $9.8 million worldwide. On a $30 million budget. Clearly, Sony thought they had something that would pull in both older and younger SNL fans, but the numbers don't lie. Nobody showed up. And once the disappointing box office rolled in, critics weren't quite as enthusiastic either. The big awards run never happened. Just one Golden Globe nomination for Gabriel LaBelle. This thing dropped in September, and after that, silence. On paper, Boy Kills World looked like it had breakout potential. A hyper-violent, off-the-wall action comedy with a crazy revenge plot, wild fight sequences, and just enough weirdness to stand out. But when Lionsgate gave it a wide release in April, it barely made a dent, just $3.3 million worldwide. On an $18 million budget, 6 weeks in theaters, and it was gone. For an R-rated action flick with a solid cast, that's rough. But then again, Boy Kills World was barely marketed. The cast is talented, sure, but no big social media stars, no major box office draws, and the reviews were mixed. Even with all that, it still felt like something this stylized, this over-the-top, would find an audience. But it didn't. Theaters ignored it, and now it's been dumped on streaming where, yeah, still nothing. Maybe one day, the algorithm gods will step in and give it another shot. But for now, it's practically buried. Nobody thought Drive Away Dolls was going to be a massive box office hit. But with Ethan Coen at the helm, half of one of the greatest directing duos in film history, this should have done fine. It didn't. This oddball crime caper completely flopped. Even the most loyal Coen Brothers fans just didn't show up. This is their worst box office for a wide theatrical release in over 30 years. That's how bad it was. Final total was just $7.9 million worldwide. Marketing tried to sell it as a fun, quirky ride, but audiences weren't having it. The cinema score came in at a C, which basically means not outright hated, just nothing special. And when you don't even have word of mouth on your side, that's a wrap. Not even a year later, and Drive Away Dolls has already disappeared. No one's talking about it, no one remembers it. Just a messy footnote in the Coen Brothers' filmography.